You're listening to Salty Believer Unscripted, a production of SaltyBeliever.com.
It's time for Salty Believer Unscripted again, and we have a very special guest with us tonight. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Albert Mohler on our podcast tonight.
Jared is like a kid in a candy store.
I am.
I'm just going to have to...
I'm an alumni of Southern Seminary, and so it's a great honor to have the president of my school here. Dr. Mohler's been speaking at BYU all day long today, and then again at a small conference at First Baptist Provo called Contend, and we've heard a lot of good things about what it means to be a Christian in this shifting culture.
I have to say, I think the sermon was one of those that spoke to me in confirmation, but also just in a sort of really convicting direction. I think it'll be one that I will probably take with me for a long time. Wow. So I really appreciate what you're doing out here.
So as a lot of our listeners know, here at Risen Life, we're a Bible teaching church, and we're looking to plant other churches. And so if you could just take a few minutes, kind of describe the culture as you see it going for Christians. And then we really want to get at how do we plant churches in this culture that would be able to survive kind of the shifts that are going on. Because as we've been reading lots of books on church planting, it seems like they're most of them are in the older mindset.
Yes.
With the culture, that onslaught that's coming on.
Right. I think we first need to deal with the cultural shift that you talked about tonight, and then it'll make a little bit more sense if we bring to light some of these other pieces.
Yeah, culture is always a moving target, but the velocity of the change is different from age to age. We're living in a time of incredibly rapid change. Mm-hmm. And by the way, you don't have to have great theological insight to see this. Just think of technology. I mean, we now expect a complete new version of our smartphone on an annual basis. Mm-hmm. And, the iPhone is just 10 years old, and already we don't think we can live without it. It's so much a part of the furniture. The technological pace is so fast. Most of us are fairly confident that within 24 or 36 months, we could be dependent upon technologies that don't even exist now. But human beings don't have a very good ability to maintain and experience that kind of change in a healthy kind of way. And we tend to confuse the things that should and must change with the things that shouldn't. And so an awful lot of the people around us, quite frankly, think of moral values and spiritual truths as changing in the same way that everything else around them is changing, from the economy to technology to even the composition of the population of their town. So I think we have to say to people, look, change is a fact of cultural life, but this is a very unique moment where the cultural change is just coming with a velocity that has never been experienced before. You can't just say a velocity that we haven't experienced lately. It is documentable and provable that this kind of velocity has never happened before.
And it's changing in a way that's maybe not so favorable to Christians in some areas, in that, kind of like you described tonight, in that where we were seen in a positive light with culture, it's shifting to where now we are seen in maybe not as positively as we have in the past.
Well, yeah, I think for a long time we've been seeing the collapse of cultural Christianity, and it was kind of like, for a long time, I think the best way to put it is it was kind of like an iceberg. It was melting, but it was melting pretty slowly, and so we just got used to it, thinking it was always going to be around. But then it got into some warmer water and started to melt real fast, and that's what's going on here, where all of a sudden people are asking, where are all those penguins now? Because they're just gone. We thought we would have time to think some of these things through before they happened, and we don't have that time. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, even as this pace of change is new, unprecedented in human experience, it is back to the future in terms of where the church began. The church in the first century was dealing not from a position of power, but of powerlessness. It wasn't dealing from the center of the culture, but from the margins. Mm-hmm. It wasn't able to bring about coercion. It had to deal with the potential of influence. And it focused on the gospel. And so that's where we've got to be.
And I think sometimes in our youth and our naivety, that seems like a welcome change, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
We're like, yes, finally we're gonna like do something. We're gonna stand for the gospel, and that may not be the best attitude to have, but
Well, we don't get to choose our times, but I think you're right. And I hear a lot of younger pastors go, hey, the disappearance of cultural Christianity is a good thing. Well, first of all, it was a sure thing. I mean, by its very definition, it can't last. But even me, those young pastors who say, I'm glad for cultural Christianity to be passing, are not yet aware of the fact that means a lot of doors are going to be slammed in their face.
And maybe their job.
And their church members' jobs. And their ability, their own kids, to get into colleges and then get jobs. So, in other words, this is a pretty expensive turn. But it really doesn't help us to argue as to whether it's good or bad, because we don't get to choose our times. If we were in control of this, that'd be a good conversation to have. But we're not. Right. So the question is, okay, now what do we do? What would faithfulness require us to do?
So I've been looking at quite a few books about church planting. There's, in 5 books you see 8 models of how to do things, and a lot of them seem to take what has been done and provide some, here's how you can do this in the future, tips.
Right.
We are both church planting interns with NAM alongside of our pastoral duties, and so we've been reading a lot on church planting.
Right.
And so in thinking of this cultural shift and thinking about some of these pieces you just talked about, not being able to just simply go out and buy a building and go out and put out a bunch of marketing and go out and do some of these things.
And not even expect to be welcome in the community. Right?
Not even welcomed into the community. Possibly, definitely bivocational if you can't draw an income as easily. If there's all these issues within culture where it's not so easy to do these things, how do we think about planting out into the future with that in mind?
Well, I think it probably means that we're planting with less infrastructure than Southern Baptists and American evangelicals have traditionally thought we would plant. And then again, it's back to the future. I mean, what in the world did the Apostle Paul use in Philippi? He started with Lydia, and a house church that grew, and history records that a church was planted there, and for quite a long time thrived there. But we just take a lot for granted. And by the way, it's not just church planters that take this for granted. I'm a seminary and college president, and I will tell you that the average kid coming to college is better set up than the average corporate executive in the 1960s. And it's not necessarily the kid, but his mom, who says, in order to go to college, you got to have this and you got to have that. And by the way, a lot of moms don't know a lot of that stuff's never even opened, but nonetheless.
They feel good that they sent it.
But we think we have to have a lot of stuff to actually get started, and there is some stuff that is certainly helpful to have, and some that might even be necessary, but we don't have to have all that we've kind of expected. The other thing is we've held up a model of what's supposed to result on the other side that, to put it as easily as I can, is that you go to Boise, supported by a church in Birmingham, to establish a church that, if it works, eventually looks like the church in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't work.
I'm from Boise, so I know that doesn't work.
Okay. Well, I mean, it just doesn't work, but it makes perfect sense in Birmingham.
Yes.
And so we somehow have got to get past the idea that what we're going to end up on the other side is going to have stained glass and pews and a pipe organ. By the way, there are fewer of those in Birmingham too, but it's just a different kind of model. So, but even when it comes to paid staff and programming, I mean, a lot of these things are just going to have to change. For instance, if you're in a lot of urban areas, you've got to get used to the fact that Sunday morning might not be the optimal time for worship on the Lord's Day.
That's right.
And that indeed, in order to get people, the Lord's Day worship, there may be where most people can get together might be on Sunday night.
Right.
And you say, well, that's a revolutionary idea. Well, not according to the book of Acts, where Eutychus had been working all day and fell asleep out of the window at midnight.
He was tired.
Yeah, and I mean, number one, he'd been working during the day. Number two, he got himself to the Lord's Day worship gather with the community, and the community met when it could, and it was late on Sunday night. So I don't mean that to make that normative. It's just to say that the picture we have in our mind is of the church we know. And every one of those books you're talking about was written by someone that's got a picture in his mind.
Yeah. And
he can't write it otherwise. In other words, there is no position of neutrality from which to write. So you just read them all with the knowledge that you're reading it where you are, getting what you can out of it from the guy that wrote it where he was.
Right. That's good. Well, so flexibility, I'm hearing a lot of flexibility in this time of change.
And so, just kind of a general question on that. I mean, you visited this area, the Wasatch Front,
Right.
Northern Utah here, and I think you've gotten a good cultural feel for what it's like. And in Salt Lake,
Especially in Provo.
and in Salt Lake, where we're pastoring with Risen Life Church, we're kind of facing the edge of both worlds. Really, we face this intense religiosity,
Right.
as well as this intense paganism.
Right.
Yep. The love of the mountains.
The love of the mountains. We have so many people come to worship.
So can I interrupt you and just
Yes.
tell you that let me give you a spiritual diagnosis of your area
I would love that. Yes.
from
Yes.
the vantage point of what people are reading.
That'd be great.
So I went in the Barnes & Noble there in Salt Lake City, the one with the big water tower.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so
Trolley
I
Square.
Yep.
pardon me?
Trolley Square.
Trolley Square.
Yep.
So I went and so I when I go to bookstores, I did it today in Provo. I go and I want to say, okay, whoever's buying these books, whoever's buying these magazines, is buying them because he or she expects these things to be bought rather than other things he could have or she could have put in here. So in Provo, I didn't find one magazine that was in any way tied to Orthodox, biblical, evangelical Christianity, or to mainline Protestantism, or to Roman Catholicism. Everything was New Age. Everything was animist spirituality or some kind of neo-paganism. And that's
in Provo. In Provo.
that was in Provo today, but it was also in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
It was the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm just looking at that and saying, look, in Salt Lake City, you've actually got another thing happening, which is Salt Lake City is really a part of the new Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And so the people who are most likely going to be moving here are going to be people who would be more at home in Northern California or in Seattle.
That's right.
Rather than Provo.
And we are seeing that a
And we're
lot.
seeing
Yeah.
that a lot.
So, but that's America. So right now, one of the things we have to realize missiologically is that if you are in one of these young creative cities where you have a high-tech, high cultural creativity quotient, then it really doesn't matter all that much if you're in Salt Lake City or Tempe, or for that matter, the Research Triangle in North Carolina. Because at least the people moving in, not necessarily the people who are there, but the people moving in are likely to be fairly remote from evangelical Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. So we would probably do well to go to some of the places where they're moving from, see what that looks like, get an idea what that might.
Well, I think
look
it's places where it's not that they have an understanding of the church they're trying to look to match. They don't have any understanding of the church.
Right, exactly.
It's hard to exaggerate how secular the Pacific Northwest is amongst especially the generational cohort that is young, highly educated, and involved in the technology fields. Because that just tends to be basically some of the most secular cultural space in America.
Yeah.
And we regularly have people walk in our doors that have never, ever been in a church context.
Yeah,
Right.
and we're
They
in Salt
don't
Lake
know
City.
how to do it.
That's
We're in
the
Salt Lake City.
weirdest
Right.
thing. I mean, it's pretty wild. Not to change gears, but I know you've been busy, you've been really tired. You've been on a whirlwind of just traveling. You want to give us just a little insight on what that's been like, where you've been?
Well, the
what
Lord
you're
has
seeing?
given just some amazing responsibilities and opportunities. I'm trying to be a good steward of it. And I consider it all to be a tremendous privilege. And I've been able, I speak in churches, I speak at a lot of conferences. I'll be at the Shepherd's Conference with John MacArthur next week. The next week I'll be at the Ligonier Conference in Orlando. And those are very big events.
And T4G.
And we have T4G coming up in April.
Jared's very excited.
I'm
You're
very
going.
excited. Me and Kevin, our senior pastor, are coming.
Very glad you're coming. I do a lot of work on college and university campuses. As a matter of fact, I started to say something, which I wish I had in the earlier session. I have a standing rule that if any college or university invites me to speak officially, I will go. And I do mean any. If it's Jewish or Muslim or Hindu, I will go. Because I think that's Act 17. You know, if you get invited to the marketplace of ideas and you can go and speak the gospel, woe unto you if you don't.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So, for instance, I would not speak at the Tabernacle, but I will certainly speak at Brigham Young
At
University.
the campus. That's
Yeah,
good.
and then just 2 weeks ago, I gave a major public lecture at the Johnson School of Public Policy, University of Texas, and it was on theology and foreign policy, and I really enjoyed doing that and had a completely different conversation. I was very thankful for the opportunity to do that, thankful for all the people who came and for the good conversation. I will admit that there is a challenge of waking up in a hotel room and not having a clue what city it is. And sometimes not being sure exactly what am I supposed to do later today, because it could be something pretty significant. I better get my brain around it. But I'm not complaining at all. I consider it a tremendous privilege.
So
we don't want to. Today was.
We don't want to keep you because you are a busy guy. But I have one more.
I'm going to
question.
go do a podcast.
Yeah,
that's right. That's
After
right.
This, yeah.
I have one more. One more question for you, and that is, I mean, you were a productive guy.
Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot about that.
Yeah, I've seen your office. I've been to your library. I mean, I know that you work very hard and long hours and take in more media than I could ever dream of.
I mean, the question that comes to me is, how in the world do you do this and keep up this pace?
Well, first of all, I don't suggest it's normative, and I'm not trying to be a model for anybody here. And the Lord's just given me the ability to work pretty intensely. And for instance, my wife Mary will say, you know, she would have a heart attack doing what I do. I mean, I got on a plane in Chicago last night, opened my laptop, and wrote the address I gave at Brigham Young University this morning.
Oh, wow.
Had it formatted on my website, documented, and ready to go.
So the airplane is really your office?
It was last night. I didn't have any choice because I was speaking right up to the last minute in Louisville.
Wow.
And as a matter of fact, I got back from delivering the address to National Religious Broadcasters on Saturday night at 4:30 in the morning in time to preach in a couple of hours, just a few hours at Highview, and then take a Sunday afternoon nap and then get on the plane and fly here. So, I mean, that's just kind of the way it works. But... I'm thankful. My dad had a very strong work ethic, and the day I turned 14, he took me to the county office where I got a work permit, and he put me to work in his store the day I turned 14, which is the youngest you could do. And I think basically it's been a very good thing. But the Lord's also given me work that I love, so. Yeah, I will feel sometimes like I'm at the end of my tether. But, again, I'll quote my wife, Mary. She'll come along and say, look, you asked for this. If they ask you to do it again, you'd still say yes again. So,
that's right.
There you go.
Well, so I was going to say, one last thing. So you've been here in Utah, again, several times. What would you leave kind of our average listener believers here in the Utah-Idaho area? How would you encourage them with what you've seen and how to press on in the Lord?
Well, I've said this several different ways just in the last 24 hours. I think the people living in this Intermountain West area, and especially right here in the heart of the valley here in Utah, I think you're on the cutting edge of what America is going to look more like. I think the people moving here are, by and large, representing the great missiological challenge that we have. Then there are historic challenges. The LDS Church here, and the history of Utah, which presents some unique challenges. But in the main, I think that the fact that evangelicals are in a minority and have been for a very long time, virtually from the beginning of Utah as a territory, in a minority, means you're on the cutting edge as a laboratory of what Christians in the rest of America are going to wake up and find. And so I'm not asking you to rejoice in every particular. I am asking you to consider the fact that the Lord's given you the stewardship here of helping the rest of the church to figure a lot of these things out.
Wow.
So I'm thankful for you.
Well, that gives us two things to pray about. We'll leave our listeners with a charge to pray. Yeah. Pray for Dr. Mohler. You can keep up the pace and continue to go to these campuses and go to these places where you're able to preach the gospel. And pray that he has the opportunity to do that boldly and well as he's been doing. And then it sounds like pray for our nation that we start to get a good handle on where we're headed if this is what the rest of the country is going to be.
I love the fact you guys are doing a podcast. While I was in Nashville, I helped to encourage the National Religious Broadcasters and their new digital media emphasis. I've been podcasting for a very long time, so if I can do a commercial, I'd love for you folks to know about the briefing every day.
Oh, yeah, please do it, please. Let's hear it real clear. Let me get this right up here real clear.
The briefing every day, Monday through Friday. We have many, many thousands of listeners. It's a Christian worldview analysis of news and events, about 18 to 20 minutes, and lots of folks find it very helpful. I'm always encouraged I come to a place like this and find people who listen to it, including some students at Brigham Young who listen to it Monday through Friday.
Can they find that at your website?
At albertmohler.com. That's albertmohler.com. And also the second show is Thinking in Public, which is a podcast, which is a long format, like an NPR interview program.
Oh, really?
Which is a lot of fun.
So we have some background noise, so I'm going to say that again. It's Thinking in Public.
That's right.
And you can find it like on iTunes or Google.
If you go to albertmohler.com, you can find it all. And on iTunes, that and Ask Anything Weekend Edition is also there. And all that background noise just proves authenticity.
We're pretty low tech here in Unscripted.
Yeah, so it's been a great honor to have you, Dr. Mohler.
No,
thank
Jared,
you.
Bryan, thanks. It's been great to be with you.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, until next time. Thanks for listening. For more information, please visit www.SaltyBeliever.com.